Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, with two presentations looking at what was a very messy birth for Weimar Germany, defeat and the German Revolution, focusing in this presentation on defeat. Germany's leaders claimed it hadn't been defeated, but it had. Germany's last desperate attempt to win the war, the Ludendorff offensive in the spring of 1918, had failed, and the Germans were being pushed back, with increasing numbers either surrendering or else deserting. The Kaiser, Hindenburg and Ludendorff were all fully aware of the inevitability of defeat. The Kaiser had told Ludendorff that we have reached the limits of our capacity. The war must be ended. And Ludendorff himself told a colleague, "We cannot win this war anymore, but we must not lose it." If they did, the peace settlement would be terrible. So an armistice was desperately needed. So, on September the 29th, 1918, Hindenburg and Ludendorff pressed upon the Kaiser that Germany must seek an armistice. But President Wilson wouldn't negotiate with the Kaiser or the military dictatorship, that is, Hindenburg and Ludendorff, that had run the war effort since August 1916. They needed to hand power back to the Reichstag, which would of course also hand responsibility for the armistice away from the army and the Kaiser and on to a civilian government. Here is the source of the stab in the back myth. So the Kaiser reluctantly appointed Prince Maximilian of Baden, actually his cousin, as his new chancellor. Prince Max was charged with reintroducing parliamentary government and with opening negotiations for an armistice. It was hoped that a more democratic-looking government would get better terms, and Prince Max was chosen to lead the government because he had spoken out against unrestricted submarine warfare, and so it was hoped the Americans would work with him. His government included members of the SPD and the Centre Party. But now it was Prince Max who had to be convinced that an armistice was a necessity. Hindenburg urged Ludendorff to press for an armistice, and Ludendorff made clear to Prince Max that Germany could not sustain its effort any longer. With Prince Max now convinced, after a few serious wobbles with the Americans, negotiations began. But, faced with the likelihood of a peace that would humiliate Germany, Hindenburg and Ludendorff now made a complete about-face and sent a message to their army group commanders describing any armistice terms as not only unworthy of Germany, but totally unacceptable to the dignity of the German army. Therefore, they ordered a fight to the finish. The order was withdrawn when one of the commanders protested, but the order had got into the hands of the Independent Social Democrat Party, who were strongly anti-war, and they passed it on to the German press. When it was printed in German newspapers on October the 25th, a furious Prince Max demanded that either the Kaiser ask for Ludendorff's resignation or else his government would resign. Ludendorff would eventually go into exile in Sweden, though he would reappear in dramatic fashion alongside Hitler in 1923. Hindenburg's offer to resign, though, was rejected. Now let's turn our attention to this stab-in-the-back myth, because it is so important. And I think we need to go back first to the July crisis and the decision-makers who took Germany into the war. Not an elected government, but the Kaiser, the government he appointed, and his military advisers. And Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg had largely left the running of the war to the military and gave way to all their demands. The Reichstag did much the same. But by 1916 the Chancellor began to lean towards a negotiated peace, and in July 1917 the Reichstag passed a peace resolution, supported by Social Democrats, the Centre Party and the People's Progressive Party. They argued that the war had become imperialist in nature, pointing to the September programme for proof. They also wanted to make the government responsible to the Reichstag, not the Kaiser. That is, they were calling for representative democracy. Of course, it didn't happen. Instead, Bethmann Hollweg was dismissed. And with the victory over Russia and the gains written into the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, well, the military dictatorship took an even stronger grip on power. From this point until the end of the war, Hindenburg and Ludendorff ruled over Germany, with hardly even an acknowledgement to the Kaiser. This didn't prevent strikes in January 1918, however, though they met with little sympathy from soldiers at the front, who were still being told to expect victory. This changed, though, with the failure of the Ludendorff offensive, and in the last 4 months of the war, almost 400,000 German soldiers had surrendered, far more than the rest of the war combined. And it's estimated that from August onwards 750,000 soldiers deserted. Then there was the mutiny at Kiel and the German Revolution, with demands for peace, democracy and for the Kaiser's abdication. There was then, going right back to 1916, a reaction to the conditions war had subjected ordinary Germans to, both on the front and at home too. This in turn led to demands for an end to the war and for changes to the political system that had taken Germany into the war, a war that did quickly become a war of acquisition for Germany, only to bring it to the brink of defeat. But though it wanted an end to the military dictatorship of Hindenburg and Ludendorff, none of this was a stab in the back to Germany's fighting men, and that the German army was being pushed back day by day had a lot more to do with the desertions than the strikes or the political positions being taken back home. And ultimately, it was Hindenburg and Ludendorff that first pushed for an armistice, only to then push the blame on the newly formed government. So, I hope I've shown that the context of defeat was very important to Weimar. Weimar was associated with that defeat. Even if that wasn't deserved, it led to the myth of the stab in the back that would badly damage Weimar. Let me thank you so much for listening, and remind you that you can, if you wish, see if I have tutorial slots available. I can help you clear any doubts in your knowledge and help you apply that knowledge to potential exam questions. The aim, of course, would be to lift your grade. If that's something that interests you, get your parents to get in touch with me at historymadeeasier@gmail.com, and we'll see if we can work something out. But for now, cheers.